Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the Thurston County Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session for Wednesday, December 4th, 2024. It is 3:06 p.m. My name is Ty Menser, Chair of the Board. Vice Chair Commissioner Fournier joining on Zoom. Commissioner Carolina Mejia, Gary Edwards, and Emily Klaus here to my left. County Manager Leonard Hernandez, and Assistant County Manager Josh Cummings. We have live streaming through the Thurston County YouTube channel. We have an hour and a half to cover two principal topics. The first is 2025 legislative session, kind of a look ahead preview with our Deborah Mejia from our Capital Consulting, is that your company, that helps us with our legislative agenda and working through all of the meetings and advocacy that we do to promote county priorities at state level. And I think the goal is to have Deborah walk us through some information. Is there anything you need to set up?
Chair, but if I could ask for your pardon for about 10 minutes, I'm going to run and do something, but Deborah can definitely take on the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and Commissioners. Nice to see everyone. So I'm just real quickly going to go through what's happening right now in terms of the 2025 legislative session that is rapidly approaching. It is going to be a long session, the 105-day, we hope only 105-day biennial budget session, where the legislature adopts three biennial budgets, a 4-year balanced operating budget, a 2-year capital budget, and then the transportation budget. Last time they did 6 years out, so we'll have to see what happens this next time. In terms of the balance of the legislature, the Democrats increased their majority by 1 seat in each chamber. So they picked up the House seat in the 26th legislative district, which is the Kitsap-Pierce area. And the Senate's Democrats picked up the 18th legislative district, which is down in Clark County, although the Secretary of State mandated a machine recount on that one because there was, I think, like 172 vote difference. And so state law requires a recount when the numbers are that low. There will be some key legislative changes as they start the 2025 session. We had a lot of legislators leave, and some House members are now in the Senate. Some Senate members have gotten higher office, and so there's been a big shift in terms of leadership in both the House and the Senate. In terms of the Senate, there is a new majority leader, Jamie Peterson. He's from the Seattle area. And there's a new deputy leader, new floor leader. There are a lot of new Senate committee chairs, and most notably for us is Jessica Bateman, who will be chair of the Housing Committee, which, of course, we all know what a champion she is on housing and housing affordability, and expect to see a lot of legislation related to those kinds of things next session. And then on the House side, one of the notable changes is there is a new caucus chair, and that is Representative Abarno. So those are the ones that touch Thurston County, but there were other changes as well. And then, of course, we know that Governor-elect Ferguson is making appointments now too. So there's going to be just a sea change in terms of the executive branch and the legislative branch next session. And they are going to be dealing with some very difficult issues. So on the next slide, please. So on the operating budget, they have been saying that they anticipate a $10 to $12 billion shortfall over the next 4 years. Again, the legislature is required to pass a balanced budget. Senator Peterson just recently, the new Senate Majority Leader, recently said that he's actually using a $14 billion budget deficit issue. And so we know that the governor asked state agencies to provide budget reduction proposals, and then just this week he implemented a spending freeze on cabinet agencies. So, and then also with the transportation budget, the legislature is looking at about an $8 billion shortfall over the next 10 years for transportation. Gas tax revenues are declining mostly because of the increased miles per gallon that vehicles are getting. And so they're buying less gas. And so the gas tax revenue is going down. So they're trying to figure out what to do. So right now, the budget leaders and are talking with people that they need to be talking to about scrubbing the budget and about looking at additional revenues. The Senator Elias recently said that he's the chair of Senate Transportation, that their plan A is to come up with a joint proposal that would increase revenues and stabilize things enough for both operating and transportation. And if they do something like that, they maybe could shift the sales tax from motor vehicles over to the transportation budget to help. They're also looking at, in terms of transportation, they're looking at increasing permit fees and toll charges and things like that. But he would prefer that they come up with one big coordinated solution for this issue, that this big hole that the state has, rather than doing a bunch of little things. Like that would be Plan B, doing a bunch of little things. So we'll have to see what happens with that. And they are, in terms of transportation, looking at legislation next session. Representative Five, he's chair of House Transportation, said he was going to introduce a bill on starting a road usage charge program in Washington State. The state's been looking at it for a long time. They're looking at it in terms of a slow implementation, more of a dial than a switch, because it would be such a big change for Washington State citizens. But they're looking at getting that going, and then they're looking at other revenue options too for transportation. So we're gonna be dealing with a lot of discussions around budget cuts. I did ask the Administrative Office of the Courts where our judicial reimbursement was, and at this point, it is still in their carry forward. That's almost $2.2 million. So we'll keep a close eye on that and protect that. So, in terms of the priorities for transportation, transportation leaders have said that their priorities are they want to finish what's already been started in both Connecting Washington and Move Ahead packages. They want to address the growing backlog of maintenance and preservation to protect what we've already got. They want to make key investments to keep the economy going and continue to fund things like the Nisqually River Bridge, so that's important to us. And then address traffic safety, because there's been just a historic loss of life. So those are the four pillars that they're really looking at in terms of transportation. But Senator Elias did say that they may have to postpone or cancel some transportation projects that were already scheduled to get some funding in the future. So we'll have to see what happens. So on the next one, key policy issues. Fiscal sustainability is going to be a big one. We know that that's a big issue with local governments also. We are expecting to see another go at lifting the 1% property tax cap. That's important not only for operating but also for county transportation. And some of us attended the LSC meeting and listened to what WASAC, the Association of Counties, is planning on going forward with. They hope to have a bill introduced that would also do a graduation of the real estate excise tax, similar to what the state did a few years ago. So that would bring in more revenue, potentially looking at a county utility tax as a revenue source, and then increasing state shared revenues, especially the cannabis shared revenue, having it be a minimum of 20% for cities and counties, which it has not been that high. So those would be some things that would help. Public defense is going to be another big issue, especially depending on what the court decides to do. And so we're going to have to figure out how we're going to navigate that one. WASAC has a proposal out there where the state would pay 50% of the current expenses, and there would be a formula for the rest of it. And then for any new costs that we would have, depending on what the court does, the state would pay for all of those new costs. So we'll have to see what happens with that. On housing, both the Senate and the House Democratic leaders have said that housing is going to be one of their main issues that they're going to be dealing with again next session. They're calling it Housing Part 3. So I talked with Representative Reed, who is working on transit-oriented development. they're gonna be looking at the multifamily tax exemption. They're going to be looking at streamlining permitting. There's gonna be a push to take a look at reducing regulations in order to make development easier. There's gonna be a look at increasing middle housing types within unincorporated UGAs and 80
Did you say rental housing or is that like ADUs?
ADUs, attached dwelling units, yeah. They're also gonna be looking at rent stabilization, rent protections. So that's gonna be another big issue next session. And behavioral health is gonna continue to be an issue that they're going to be dealing with, and substance use disorder. So we'll have more input into that as we go forward. There's gonna be strong environmental priorities. We have a new Commissioner of Public Lands coming in who used to be, when he was in the House, the chair of the Environment Committee. So he's got a really strong passion for that. And so we'll have to see what kind of policies he brings forward. And then I talked with Rhett Berry earlier this year. She has been the lead on the RAP Act. She said that's coming back, and she has a really good feeling that it's gonna pass this next session. In addition to those things, we know that education is going to be a really big issue. Superintendent Rakedahl submitted a $3 billion increase for the budget in order to fully fund education. There's been a failure to fund special education, the MSOC, the material supplies and operating costs for schools, and their transportation costs. So they've had to dip into their levies to do that. So there's going to be a push to have the state fund that. And then childcare, continuing childcare is going to be a big issue. I know Rep. Couture said that he was going to be introducing a bill on childcare deserts. So community safety is going to continue to be a big issue as well. So on the next slide, please. Pre-filed bills started on Monday. There's already 25 bills in the system. And so I will be putting those into the county's database, and we'll be looking at those and seeing which ones get hearings. Governor Inslee's budget is supposed to come out next week. We anticipate that there will be 2 books on that. Book 1 will be the balanced budget, and then book 2 will be assuming revenues and potentially cuts as well. We have our legislative breakfast coming up on the 12th. Session starts on the 13th. And we'll be meeting with legislators throughout the session on various issues. And then, of course, I'll have weekly updates that I'll send in weekly reports, and then potentially daily communication with Josh and
On the
Rob.
12th, that's our breakfast coming up, but did you say the 13th?
January 13th.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's a typo. Yeah.
Okay.
No, that
You
isn't
just
a typo.
said the 13th, but you meant January 13th.
Well, session starts January
Yeah.
13th. Yeah.
Okay,
The
that's-
breakfast is December 12th.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay,
that's correct.
yeah.
Okay, I may have said it wrong, sorry. And then on terms of Governor Inslee's budget, that will be a template for Governor-elect Ferguson to decide what he wants to do. So, that.
Questions? I got one. So I'm wondering about if you have any thoughts about the public defense bill, because if you think about the county's bottom line, that bill, if it were to be passed, would be way more impactful to us than the 1% cap. Because that would basically say the $8 million that we spend, we get $4 million back, and we'd be insulated from any increase in this new caseload standard while providing better public defense services to our community. That's $4 million, whereas the 1% cap means about $900,000 to us at the most. It would be an opt-in, as I understand it. I guess I'm just, to me, that 1% has always been so politically charged, whereas public defense, in a way, because everybody kind of acknowledges that we're at the bottom. I mean, the data is very clear that we're like 49th out of 50 states in state funding already, and now we have caseload standards, and it seems like it might be a little bit more of a bipartisan friendly issue, even though it's obviously a huge price tag. But I guess I'm just wondering if your thoughts about is that one to put our effort behind. Does it have a chance?
Well, you don't get what you don't ask for.
Yeah.
And I think that that is such a big issue that, I do think that people would, once they understand and really see the impacts in terms of how low Washington State is in terms of providing those services, that it's obviously necessary and it's obviously needed. But like you said, we're facing a huge budget hole.
Yeah.
So I think it's gonna depend on what kind of cuts they take and what kind of revenue packages they come up with. On the 1%, I agree that local governments would get a small portion of that if they lifted that cap. On the other hand, a big portion of that goes to schools and goes to fire and things like that. And so there is a coalition of folks, and I participate in those meetings, that are working to try and get that lifted. So
Because it helps across different
it
areas.
helps a lot of different issues.
Yeah, I'm for it. And I just thought, seemed like I was just worried about, like, if politically the public defender thing actually has a little bit more support, people need to understand that the actual dollars and cents means a lot to the county.
Yeah. So one of the things that the Senate did differently for 2025 is they restructured slightly the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and they added a new vice chair, and they added the vice chair of finance, and Noelle Frame is going to be that vice chair. She was the chair of House Finance when she was in the House, and she was the co-chair of the tax infrastructure work group when they met to talk about all the different tax things. Mm-hmm. So she's going to be taking a look at all of these things and just really digging down into all of them. They really want to do something where if they do a revenue package, they want to tax wealthy individuals and wealthy corporations and make sure that it's not going to be a hit to lower income people. So, it just depends on what kind of revenue package they have, but we're going to push hard for both.
Okay, sure.
How is Representative Bateman going to be on the ADU issue? She's there?
So Senator-elect Bateman.
Oh, yeah, okay,
yeah.
right.
And
Everybody moves on. Some go out of the business. Okay.
she was a very strong proponent of the middle housing legislation. She was the champion for middle housing. She was the champion for middle housing when she was on the Olympia City Council, and she really pushed that through the legislature. And she did a really good job on it. So she's a big champion for all different kinds of middle housing types, including ADUs, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, sixplexes, cottage housing. Yeah.
And then do you think there's some new restrictions taking place or being lifted, however we have to do something faster starting in January from permitting and whatnot?
SB 5290.
Yeah, I think that was Senator Mullen's bill, right? Yeah.
So yeah, you'll have a briefing on SB 5290 and the permitting process coming up.
But I mean, are you talking they're gonna tighten it up even more? Is that what it sounds like?
Well, I think that there's going to be legislation that's introduced, probably from the minority caucuses that would be more in line of what the Building Industry Association would like to have in terms of streamlining. And then, of course, we heard that WASAC is going to be asking for a budget proviso for, I think they called it stock housing pilot, where there would be 4 counties, 2 east, 2 west. Do you know about that,
Yeah,
Josh?
yeah. So that's the one where we've talked about the stock plans, the local municipalities have stock plans for the ADUs. The state is thinking of trying to do that. So that's why we're holding until we see that legislation go through. But back on the permitting process, you have 2 things happening. So you have the SB 5290, which passed a few years ago, and it's going into effect in 2025. And that's what our team has been working for the last year to get ready for. And that's the briefing you'll hear. And then the new legislation that Deborah's speaking about, we're keeping an eye on that. But 2 things are happening. The big one is that it's happening, the SB 5290.
Because it got passed. That's
It's
real.
passed, and now 2025 is when it has to be implemented. And so our team is ready to go on that.
Commissioner Fournier?
You'll hear more later.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, the stock housing and the ADU discussion, those are all things that we've already identified as goals for us. Are there ways that we can jump on board, join coalition, advocate, or is there anything that we can do to, or if there's, trial counties that are going to be floated out there, we could sign up for that?
Those are wonderful questions, and yes, we want to set up meetings with all of our delegation members and let them know where the county is at on that and ask for their support. And then, so we also, WASAC said that they hadn't picked the 4 counties yet, but if Thurston County has an idea and they want to talk with WASAC about that, and then we can again talk with Senator Bateman about that. I'm guessing she'll be involved in that, and let her know that Thurston County, if you want to be one of the pilot counties and can make a case for that, we could.
I feel like we're already primed, Josh, I'm sure is already primed to put us in that kind of position, since we've already been kind of working on it and kind of vetted it as a goal and vision for our county.
We've definitely made it known that we're available, but that's a step further, is to say that we'd like to be one of the 4 pilots. If the board would pursue that.
Can we put that as a very soon talking discussion or point?
Yeah, and to be clear, we have reached out to Paul Jewell at WASAC a couple of occasions, so.
You're talking about having stock plans?
That's what Commissioner.
Yeah. Yeah, any way that we could lower, development costs to spur development is I'll wait.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay, like just that economist that spoke at the WASAC conference, I thought he gave an absolutely compelling argument for kind of housing, but like housing maybe in a different way than we promote. And he talked about how the Washington economy is one of the strongest economies in the country, and that's not our biggest concern. Our biggest concern is housing being bottlenecked, and what he said was that the greatest need wasn't in like the lowest income levels of houses. His argument was that kind of there's this transition that goes in somebody's housing development journey, and it's kind of the mid-level houses that aren't being built that allow people to move out of those first houses that you purchase. And so the lower income houses just aren't becoming available because people aren't moving out of them and making those first, ownership houses even available. And I hadn't really heard that kind of argument made before. And, we get a lot of, we've gotten several development proposals where they're looking to make, affordable housing. And it just seems like there's a lot of barriers to anybody doing that. So I would want to hear about any proposals that, that Senator Bateman's bringing forward to kind of change the regulatory environment for houses.
Duplexes used to be a big deal for young people getting started. In the days of old, they'd build a duplex, rent one side out, live in the other side. I don't know, growth management kind of beat that up, I think, at some point. But has that come up at all from Bateman's perspective?
Yes, building more duplexes, that kind of thing. Those are all things that she actually got put into the Growth Management Act as something that needs to be done. And so let's see if I can find my notes here on this. So there's a definition now in the Growth Management Act of middle housing, which is duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, fiveplexes, sixplexes, townhouses, stacked flats, courtyard apartments, and cottage housing. Okay. So middle housing, and then ADUs are also something that they're promoting, that more is done on that.
I guess then what I would bring up to the body is, if we're serious about being one of those pilot counties, I think we ought to do a thumbs up thing right now, so when Deborah leaves here, because it's coming, it's coming pretty darn fast.
So maybe a more prescriptive action, a thumbs up to draft a letter from the board to WASAC that we'd like to be one of those pilot communities.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, but.
Because we've reached out via the CPED director, but some gravitas from the board might help with that process.
I'm interested in learning a little bit more. I'm interested in this topic, but I would need to know a little bit more to be able to give a thumbs up on drafting a letter.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm in the
so we,
same boat, because I mean, I'm all for everything, the work that Jessica Bateman's done
Yep.
within municipal boundaries and UGAs. When it comes to within the rural area, which is what I think a lot of what Commissioner Edwards is talking about, that's a different story, and I have concerns. So I'd have to see exactly what we were talking about.
Well, if you would be willing for UGAs, I mean,
Yeah.
even that is a start,
Absolutely.
you know, so,
And the stock plan thing, I think is great.
Yeah.
To the extent that we're allowing them, I mean, not to say where they go, but wherever we say they go, do it faster and easier. I'm for that kind of process.
maybe duplexes,
Just concerned about letting them spread into places they shouldn't be going.
duplexes could go maybe into rural America, but fourplexes, eightplexes, Xplexes, maybe not.
Something to think about.
You know, maybe make a compromise on that whole deal, because we're gonna have to make room for folks and make it easier and make it affordable.
Commissioner Fournier?
Yeah, the concept of stock plans is, to me, you know, very easy to get behind. You know, if I want to build a house, if I have to have plans designed, approved, all those steps to go through the county. If I can go into the county and there's a plan on a shelf. You know, they used to be able to buy houses from the Sears magazine, you know, and then they could just put them up. You know, if we can create that type of opportunity, that lowers barriers for people. So I'd love to see a letter drafted, and I'd also love to learn more about this concept of housing compression that I brought up, where you know, if you know, we need to allow for, you know, housing development at all the different kind of, you know, stratifications. Otherwise it gets bottlenecked and there's no opportunity for the housing that already exists to be occupied by, you know, folks that are just getting to income levels that can afford houses.
I saw the presentation that you saw as well. That was interesting. He's basically arguing that, yeah, the bottleneck can occur at any point, because it's basically people get a little house and then they move up and then they end up, it seemed a little simplistic, honestly, because it was kind of like everyone ends up in a fancy, huge luxury house, and it's just a matter of, but if you have a gap in any point in the chain, there's a bottleneck.
Well, the
So he
interest
was
rate.
trying to say that the bottleneck chain is not, everyone talks about low-income housing, but that, he said, that's not the bottleneck. It's in the middle, as Wayne said, and so that people that are already in lower-income housing, they can't get into the middle housing, so they're stuck. So now there is a shortage of low-income housing because the people in there aren't moving to the bigger ones. Maybe that's true, I don't know, but,
I'd like to learn more I'd like to explore that concept. And if there's some truth to that, then that's something that we could talk out as a board or work with our legislators on, maybe, because I'd never heard that concept.
I'm all for exploring all of the above, but I don't think we ought to wait to write the letter. That's where I'm coming from, because things are gonna be happening pretty fast. We're into the middle of December pretty quick, and
Mr. Klaus?
Yeah, I'm interested in seeing the data behind that. I didn't see the presentation that you saw, but I have heard of the concept before, and I've heard it referred to as like the trickle-down approach. Basically, essentially exactly what Wayne is explaining. So it sounds like the same thing to me. But there's
I
been
would just say that using the term trickle down is kind of, there's a negative connotation to that.
Commissioner Fournier, hold on.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
there's been conflicting data. I've looked into this a little bit before, not recently, but like earlier this year and a little bit last year. So yeah, I'm interested in just seeing that and learning more. Who gave the presentation?
He was an economist from California that we brought in a couple of times at WASAC. He really, this was kind of a side presentation before his big one. He talks about economic trends at the national scale and regional scale. And then he had this kind of side point about housing. And
Yeah.
I've heard what you've heard,
Yeah.
more about the, I've heard it like about the luxury housing thing.
Right, yeah.
This was a little more nuanced, because it was saying, it's not about building a bunch of fancy houses, but there was this middle tier, you know, that we've heard about. So that was kind of like a little twist on that approach. Commissioner Fournier?
Yeah, if you want to look over, it's Beacon like a lighthouse economics.
Okay, awesome.
And I just echo what Commissioner Menzer said that, if you, using the words trickle down has a, a different kind of connotation than what this economist was kind of talking about. So I would just caution you from not using those words and, the compression effect and, maybe we can explore that concept.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree about the connotation. That's just what I've heard it referred to as, but
Yeah, I mean, it fits better when you're talking about, don't worry about building a bunch of, $1 million homes, because the housing will trickle down. I mean, I've heard that same thing, but this was
Yeah.
a little different spin.
Okay.
But go ahead, Commissioner Mejia.
Thank you. I would be in support of being a pilot county as well, and writing a letter in support for this program. I've heard plenty about it from the presentations. So just kind of wanted to add that piece.
Great. We can piggyback on the note that we sent to the commissioners on stock plans from back in August and add a little more information. Because to one of the concerns, the plan itself says that it meets like the code for the building of that structure. It still has to meet all of the land use designations for that area. So that's really, it's important to keep that in mind. That it
I
still
don't
has
think
to-
they're gonna let you build in the swamp.
Still has to meet our code.
Okay, well, that sounds good then.
And then in terms of legislators also, Representative Barkus is a key player as well. So we would want to make sure that he would know that as well. And then to your point about building things everywhere, I'm sure FutureWise will be very engaged in those discussions.
Yeah.
Chair, just wanting to track, did we get majority agreement to write a letter now, or did you want more?
It sounds like we
information?
did to me. We got 1, 2, 3, anyway.
What was the exact directive to?
Yeah, let's just be clear on that.
To write a letter to Paul Jewell from Wausau, or to Wausau, to be included as a pilot county into the bill of the stock plans.
I would also say, let's do let's reach out to those legislators that are involved in this and let them know that we're interested.
Can we have that, whatever is available to summarize that piece of legislation sent to us? If there's a,
There's a draft proviso that was in the LSC packet.
okay, so I can pull
Yeah,
it
so
on my
that-
Wausau packet.
We'll include that in the update of the stock planning brief.
If you can do that, just so I can see exactly what
Yeah.
it is that we're
We'll share the letter,
championing.
obviously with the entire board, but Josh and Deborah, if you can work on that. We're looking at a brief and then a draft letter for board consideration.
Well, I don't know if my seatmates are going down to the Great Wolf Lodge tomorrow morning. There's usually a pretty good presentation about the economic situation.
Yeah. I'll be there, although I have to step out for a meeting.
Yeah, I can't be there, I don't think, for the whole thing, but I'll
Be
be
in a
there in the
room on a
morning.
Zoom, but I'll be there in the morning, in late, early afternoon. So,
I think I can be there until about 12:30. So, Deborah, are you aware of that?
No.
EDC,
Oh, yeah.
Regional Economic Expo.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I can't be there. but-
No.
Okay, any other things with that?
Oh, yeah. Do you know, was cluster housing ever mentioned? We used to do cluster housing,
Oh, if I
where
heard
you'd
that
take,
true.
a 20-acre parcel or whatever it was, and it might have restrictions, but as long as you left a bunch of open space, you could put 4 or 5 houses pretty close together, and then keep the rest of it all open space. I don't know if she's interested, don't know where my seatmates are at on that issue or not, but it's something that, for me, it'd be worth looking at for affordable housing.
We'll see if.
I'm sure Marcus knows about it. When you made mention about the bridge at Nisqually was gonna stay, looks like that's gonna still be a high priority, but the McKenna roundabout, maybe not, or something like that. The finishing of the bypass at Yelm, that's been postponed a couple different times. I'm just wondering if
So
I'll be asked about it.
I know that there was money in the budget for Thurston County to do a roundabout. I'm not sure.
That was
if
out at Vale and
Vail. And
one at Five Corners.
Jennifer said that they were on track with getting that done, so I think that
Oh, okay.
because they're so far along with that should be fine.
I'll check in with Jennifer Walker. on that as well.
And on the traffic safety, all the fatalities and all that kind of stuff, are they considering the impaired driver portion of that equation? And the cutback on law enforcement and the whole thing, you know, I mean, that equation is probably skewed a little bit because of past legislative position.
I know that recruitment and retention of law enforcement is also going to be something that's going to be discussed a lot next session, and the basic law enforcement academy courses and that kind of thing. I don't know if they are going to take a look at the impaired driver statutes and propose to make changes to those or not, but
I'm not aware of a single legislative session since I moved here where there wasn't bills related to impaired driving, tightening the laws. So it seems like that's always.
Well, it's always an issue, but at some point, enough people mad, different ones, are gonna get aggravated about it, that it's really gonna be a high priority thing at some point.
Yeah, the other thing to point out is that any of the bills from last session, those numbers go away at the end of the year, and so we start all over again.
Start all over again.
Yeah, and so, if there are bills that come up on that, I'll definitely have them available to you.
There's one bill, just since we're talking about it, that I'm heavily involved in as a member of the Sentencing Guideline Commission. Is Representative Goodman's got a bill that's going to basically completely reshape the criminal sentencing format.
Am I gonna like it or are you gonna like it?
I'm gonna like it, I think. It's trying to do, prosecutors, it's a mix, like there's places where there can be bigger sentences and lesser sentences. I think globally, it's less sentences, but it's trying to make things more standard, like more smooth and standard, because so many things have been glommed onto it over the years that it really is clunky and doesn't work very smoothly and very logically. So really all it is an attempt to try to make it more logical and smooth and putting things in the right categories and having like just sensible, but of course in doing that, they've got to tweak ranges, and there's some places where there can be more sentences on the top end or less sentences on the lower end. So prosecutors are, I think, less thrilled about it than others, but we're trying to work in a very bipartisan and multilateral way to address
I might
people's
have time to go
concerns.
up there and camp out at the
There you go.
Capitol as time comes up now that I'm not doing this job.
Commissioner Klaus?
What about the juvenile points bill that came through? I don't think it was last year, but not the short session, but the last full session, related to juvenile points affecting sentences for adults. But the retroactivity piece wasn't implemented in that, and I think that that's coming back next year to try to do retroactivity. Do you know about that one?
I don't know the details of that, but I know obviously that juvenile justice and juvenile safety are going to be a really big issue next session.
Okay.
Fortunately, we lost Juliana at Wasac, who is our policy director related to criminal justice, and I think they've left her seat blank for like budget reasons. So we're not going to have that support that we've had in the
Where'd
past.
she go?
She went with T-Mobile.
T-Mobile, okay. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I'm interested in following that one.
Yeah, that was I think I heard the same, that it might be coming back.
I think it is. I talked to ACLU, and they're really interested in it.
I should probably move forward because we have another meaty topic to chow on. Thank you so much, Deborah.
And I'd like to make mention that, for those of you that haven't been around very long, Deborah has been a real asset to Thurston County. And my institutional memory goes with me,
Yes.
so I just want to pass that on. What a
Absolutely.
benefit.
You definitely want her by your side when you go in to speak to
There you go.
legislators.
Yep.
because It helps.
Just as
Thank
long
you.
as we all remember that. Thank you very much for, Deborah, for all you've done.
Okay, next topic is follow-up from the public hearing we had on agricultural zoning update, CPA 16. We have Ashley Arai to kind of walk us through what we heard. I have a list of questions. I'm sure commissioners have a lot of questions. So now's the time.
Great, and it was appropriate to call this a meaty subject since it is ag-related. It would raise a lot of beef here in Thurston County. I did not receive questions ahead of time, so I will do my best to answer them today. If not, I will be following up with my team in the coming days.
Can you tell us at the top of this subject, this is not a, well, this is, is this a comprehensive plan related item?
It is.
So we pass this on December 17th, or we wait a year?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, so this is part of that once-a-year opportunity to make updates to the Thurston County Comprehensive Plan. And that package contains this item as well as the 2 Grand Mound projects. And as we look ahead to December 17th, getting feedback on what goes into that package is really important so that we can prep you for success at that board meeting. So focusing on the agriculture zoning update. Next slide, please. So we're going to try to keep it simple today, and of course I'm here to answer questions, but review some of the comment themes that we received on the November 25th hearing, as well as relay concerns or questions that we heard earlier on in the process from folks that may not have had an opportunity to attend that hearing. Also thought it was appropriate, since there was so much focus on farmland conservation and agricultural viability here in the county, to highlight what the county has been doing over the last year and a half, and then forecast what we plan to do in the coming years. And those will be tied up with next steps. So next slide, please. So here's just a roll-up of what we heard in terms of the themes from last week. I think we would all agree that we have a very engaged community that really cares about conserving farmland, and so we heard that. And conserve as much farmland as possible. We also heard about the importance of supporting agricultural viability. And we have heard throughout the process, across the spectrum of stakeholders, that as we are conserving farmland, compensating property owners for any loss of value in that land. And I can touch on that more about why that's important and what we've heard from folks. There was broad support for a very flexible opt-in clause, and so staff has recommended some updates to the original policy proposals to make that even more flexible. We also heard, actually I think Betsy's here today, a recognition for the ecological functions of our working lands, and applies to both our farms and forest lands and all of the wonderful benefits that they provide to the community.
Actually, if I could just,
Yeah.
you mentioned working things through with the broad stakeholder group, and I would ask if you could elaborate a little bit on that, the conversations and some of the things you took into consideration, and why maybe in the public hearing time there was an aspect of folks represented, but why others wouldn't come out because issues may have been resolved. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and that's really that last item up there, and that is feedback that was received by someone who has been involved in the process from the very beginning, and that's considering the intent of both the state law around protecting farmland, as well as how we use soils information. So sort of rewinding back to how this whole project got kicked off, we did have a broad stakeholder work group. It was referenced in passing at the public hearing. And that work group was comprised of ranchers, small farmers or landholders, veteran farmers, conservationists, land trusts, Olympia Master Builders Association, and we all gathered around and really dug into what the county does in terms of a policy framework for protecting farmland. There were a number of themes that came out of that stakeholder work group, and this was the very beginning as we were just starting to do all the research and digging into the data. But the overwhelming theme that came up at the first meeting and came up at every single meeting of that stakeholder work group was that compensation is really important to landowners. Whether that be because it's a mom and pop farmer who have really invested everything they have in their land and they don't necessarily have retirement, or whether it's one of our larger scale farmers or ranchers, their largest commercial asset is their property. So if you think about that farmer wanting to buy a new tractor, and I just bought my first tractor, they are expensive. So when they go in to get a loan for a tractor, the only asset they have to leverage is their land. So if we decrease the value of their land, we essentially are making them a less viable commercial operation or commercial farm. And so that's what we heard in large part from our larger landholders or ranchers and farmers in Thurston County, that if the county really cares about agricultural viability, we really care about the farmers, because we can have all the farmland we want set aside, but without farmers to actually go out there and till it and raise cattle on it, we're not really gonna see as many benefits on food side for the county.
Can I ask a question now? Is there a, I know the answer is gonna be no, but see what you say to this question. Is there a rule of thumb about what that delta looks like? Like, I take your land, I'd zone it Latin term ag, it drops 10%, it drops 15%, like, you know, like what are we talking about in terms of the asserted hit that on value that people are worried about?
So I asked our agriculture program manager, Kevin Jensen, he said upwards of 50%. And I would say that that is probably on the low end from some of our other commercial farming operations. Numbers they delivered to me in talking to financial institutions was up to 75%.
Your value drops by half or more?
Mm-hmm.
Which, to your point about farmers, small farmers, large farmers who have, that's what we learned on the farm tour, their primary investment is their land. That's what they're able to take loans off of to enhance their operations, equipment, et cetera. So if that takes a hit, that's a major impact to their funding, not only their ongoing livelihood.
So at that scale, what is the, I mean, we were being hit with, first time I'd ever heard of that Thurston County had done it in Nisqually Valley or something, but I have been hit with many other counties that have like raised their conservation futures, issued bonds, paid for easements. But I mean, that seems like I know it obviously depends on how many acres you're gonna absorb into it, but that just seems like a unbelievably high, like huge undertaking.
I think the important thing to remember and what we've heard throughout this process is that focus on voluntary, sort of the opt-in. And so Stephen Connor, I think he was one of the ones who testified. He's saying that DNR is working closely with his family to secure development rights for conservation up in the Woodard Bay area. And I think it's that working alongside or partnering with our landowners. Rather than, you know, what was necessarily done in the Nisqually Valley.
I'm just saying, but I talk to the people that don't want to do it that way, and I have to give them an answer.
So we do have more information in the presentation. Might get to some of your question there.
Okay, can I add on to before? So for me, just kind of to piggyback on what Commissioner Menser said is how much were people in the Nisqually Valley compensated when this program was done back in the day? And we heard several public comments about that, right? And I know that just based on that amount, people who participated in the program were not happy and they do not feel like they were adequately compensated. So how much were they compensated? That way that's the direction the board wants to go. We at least know, like,
It's gotta be more than that.
it's gonna be more than that.
Hopefully it's a little bit more.
I would say, can we go
Yep.
through the next couple of slides and
Yeah.
maybe get to those? Thank you.
Yeah, so shifting gears, really focusing on this piece around farmland conservation and agricultural viability. Because I think the important part is it's zoning, which is what this project has been focused on for the last few years. It's just one tool in the toolbox. And when the county decided to invest in an agricultural program manager, it created an opportunity to look at all the other tools in the toolbox and not just focus on the regulatory tool. Commissioner Fournier, I think, pointed out really well last week, county's taken a holistic approach. You can't just look at protecting the farmland. You've got to think about the farmer. You got to think about the whole life cycle of the products that are being raised on that farm and how do you get them to market. Another thing we have focused on here at the county is a broad stakeholder and partner coalition cultivation. So not just focusing on one group, but really trying to bring as many people to the table as possible and figure out where we have alignment in terms of shared goals. And then how do we push those initiatives forward and achieve as many successes as possible? I already spoke about using all tools in the toolbox. If you just use zoning, you might actually be hurting the farmers that you say that you're trying to support. Another important piece is data-driven outcomes. You heard a number of times last week about this loss of farmland. I will say that that loss of farmland is tied to a voluntary census. It's taken every 5 years. The data that we've been collecting through all the monitoring we're required to do for the voluntary stewardship program is not showing those numbers. We've actually shown a slight gain. It's within the margin of error, so I wouldn't go out there with, a bullhorn, but we're not seeing the loss.
Where is this voluntary census from?
It's the United States Department of Agriculture, so they do it at a national scale. And we actually met with them. We spent 3 hours with them. They actually have an office down the street to walk through what their statistical analysis looks like, for putting out the report. And they said at the county level, it's just too granular to start to use it as a reporting mechanism at the county level. Doesn't really make sense. That's not the intention of the census, because they only get a 50 to 60% return rate from the census, like mailers and whatnot that they send out. So there's a lot of helpful data in there. I'm not discounting it, but using that as the only metric of what's happening with farmland here in Thurston County, that would not necessarily lead us to data-driven outcomes. So I think we need to look at a number of different metrics. And so we developed a full methodology for the voluntary stewardship program, which we're integrating into the comprehensive plan moving forward with a commitment of doing these regular monitoring reports so we know where we stand. We're also working closely with the state and the voluntary stewardship program work group to develop metrics for agricultural viability. That includes WSU as well, so that we're not just moving forward blindly, that we're actually using data to inform the decisions that are being made.
So are you saying that like USDA will take 50% return rate and then just double the number? They're extrapolating? Or what is the thing that they're doing wrong? Where's the gap? Because they're coming up with a number, right? People are saying, we're losing X number of acres per year, and you're saying that number is not quite right.
She said at the granular level. She
The
didn't say it
granular.
wasn't right.
They use a complex statistical analysis. I don't want to pretend that I know what the statistician does, but they essentially said that it's the accuracy as you focus in on a smaller and smaller geographic area is not going to be as meaningful.
And that's them saying it? Not
That's them saying it, yeah.
Okay.
No, it's them.
So they're saying, don't use this at a county level because it's just, when you dial it in that focused, it loses its relevance because of however they're doing the statistical background.
Yeah. They're looking for national trends to inform Farm Bill
Okay.
and policy at the federal level.
Is that just something that's easier for the different groups to access so they seize on it?
Yes, there's big news releases. The recent one just came out. February of this year. They do a really good job of getting the news out.
But that's exactly why we're doing this monitoring on a local level, is because we want the actual data through the VSP. And we haven't just been doing it long enough to have a holistic amount. But as Ashley states, the data that's coming in is saying statistically, maybe there's actually more locally.
When is that going to be done?
It's ongoing.
Oh, the VSP, so we completed our 10-year report and had to
it's
submit
just
it.
an
So we had to
ongoing
look from
basis.
2013 to 2023, and we have that information available. And it is already integrated into the draft chapter 3, which covers agricultural lands and the comprehensive plan. And that's been available to the public for a few months now. But yeah, we're happy to share that methodology. We have reported it to the state. It's a spatial analysis, so we're using maps. The USDA census has no spatial analysis. So when you say that you're losing 2,000 acres or whatever per year, my first question is, where? Like, show me on a map, where? And they don't collect the data that way. So there's no way for us to, ground truth what they are putting out. And I like data, I like maps, I want to be able to go back to them and have something that's replicable year after year so that we can be transparent and accountable to the community.
Did the stakeholder group have access to our local data?
No, that it happened, about a year before that was developed.
Maybe that could be a piece. Communication.
Yeah. Any other questions about that before we move on?
I'm excited about the next slide.
I'm gonna hold my questions so you go.
One of the things that we heard at the public comment was that there hadn't been any work done, and they're really disappointed. The next slide, I think, really goes to the commitment that the board has made and some of the major outcomes that have occurred in the past couple of years because of your commitment to agriculture in our community.
So we're moving from cute calves to chickens.
Yeah, that cute gap.
That was-
It's so cute.
They are cute. You gotta put up an ugly steer.
No, I won't do that. Sorry, I love these presentations because I get to go and pick out beautiful pictures. These are just some of the highlights. This isn't everything. It's what I could fit on a slide and still have it, be readable. And I am going to tick them off because I think it's important for the board to hear and the community to hear everything that the county has done in just the last year and a half to 2 years. You created the agriculture program manager position. I want to thank you for that. I was your first agricultural program manager. I am so proud of the work that this community is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yep. That's why you see all the policy and code stuff.
That's
That's my
right.
background. And then we turned it over to someone who is actually a farmer. We removed permit barriers for farms implementing conservation practices. This was a huge thing that we heard from the conservation districts, that our farms really wanted to be good stewards of our land. Well, they're already good stewards of our land, but they wanted to do more. And we were basically saying, sorry, you can't meet our code requirements, or it's going to cost you $10,000 a one-year process to get a permit to do this good thing. They don't have to do that anymore. It's a letter. As long as they can confirm they got a grant and it's going to help our waterways, and all the functions and values of our critical areas, they just get to move through the process and get access to funding and get those projects built. We have invested over $800,000 in just the last 2 years in our voluntary stewardship program through cost share projects, working with the conservation district. So that's money directly on the ground that the county was never able to offer. We've expanded business options for farms in the agricultural zoning or in the agritourism overlay, and that's already paying dividends. We're hearing from our agritourism operators on farms that it really has helped those changes that the board made. We completed the livestock processing study in partnership with Pierce County, but that's been a really important piece of getting the USDA processing facility off the ground there in Tenino, and all the advocacy work the board has done to help that business park become a viable development. You expanded eligibility of your open space tax program for smaller or newer farms. It used to be really hard for a small or a newer farm to meet the program requirements. There's just one last piece there, and that's eliminating the permit fee because it's still an expensive application that is a barrier, but we'll get to that. That's a future step. But at least the eligibility is there for those new farmers to participate, and we got good feedback from our veteran farmers in particular about that. We have partnered with cattle grazers to manage early blue violet prairie and sagewood. Right out of the gate through the HCP, we want the priority to be working lands easements to support our farms and creating more opportunities for grazers like Jake Yancey. He's on the short list of grazers that want to be considered for future grazing opportunities. He wouldn't have a ranch without public lands, as he noted in the public hearing, for his cattle to have access to. We completed the 10-year monitoring report. That was a big, big lift. If anyone really wants to sit down and go through spreadsheets, we have lots of them. And that's where we started being able to dig into what's going on the ground. And the findings from that report indicate that through data that our farmers really are doing an amazing job as it pertains to our critical areas and water quality. We found improvements across all the watersheds in the areas where our farms are. And last but not least, we secured almost $400,000 in grant funding to develop a working lands conservation strategy. So as we think about what other counties are doing to protect farmland, this is our mechanism for being able to compile all that information, put together options for the board in terms of these creative or innovative funding mechanisms, to support more work moving forward.
Just one or two of those would have been a big deal. But that list in a year and a half, that's huge. So thank you to Ashley for your work on that and your team.
It's an awesome team and an awesome community. Like, this also wouldn't have been done without folks like Betsy in the audience, the folks you heard from at the public hearing, our ranchers on the ground, spending a lot of time with us, schooling us on things that would be helpful for them. So a big shout out to everyone that has put in the time and energy to make that happen. But it's not done. So next slide, because I don't like being bored. We are gonna be reimagining our farmland conservation programs. We just had our first kickoff meeting. It was a brain trust. We were able to fill the room with the biggest movers and shakers in the conservation landscape, is the kickoff to our working lands conservation strategy. And they provided great feedback. We're putting together a GIS tool that will help us figure out our funding priorities and where we already have lands conserved and where we should be conserving lands. It's a commitment of Brian Benjamin, our new lead for the Habitat Conservation Program, as well as Kevin Jensen, our Ag Program Manager, to prioritize grazing in those working lands easements as we look to prairie habitat restoration. We also, in the comprehensive plan, are committing to a biannual farmland report. They'll be on the same timeline as the voluntary stewardship program. We are still committed to exploring any land use and zoning tools, and still have it on the list of projects to look at how we can use cluster zoning, actually cluster development regulations, to try to encourage more protection of farmland, and have gotten some recent examples from elsewhere that are really intriguing. And then, of course, WSU is part of CPED. And so looking at continuing the work in the industry workforce development sphere, WSU's made great headway in there, and I know that Steady's excited for continued investment in that area. And we heard from the farmers on the farm tour that it's really important. So that's just
Actually, before we get to the next slide, I'm sorry, did I cut you off? To Commissioner Mentzer's comment about we're approaching it and recommending a certain thing, but there are folks that don't agree with that recommendation, go with the commissioners and say, well, you should be doing this a different way. How can you speak to that and provide some perspective for the board on how they could understand and have some materials to respond to those folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to options are really important. So there isn't going to be one way to do this, and if we only use one tool, we're not going to be successful. So we have long-term agriculture zoning. We've got 15,500 acres about in long-term ag zoning. It's not that that tool hasn't been used. It has been used, and what our analysis found when we looked at those lands, those are the best soils that we've got left in rural, unincorporated Thurston County. There are good soils in the cities, but I don't think we're going to be converting them necessarily. So we have used that tool, and we've used it effectively to protect the best of the best farmland soils. As we look at other land that is currently being used for working lands, I think it's having a multitude of options, whether that's private market options through things like the Transfer Development Rights Marketplace, and it sounds like the legislature might be bringing up improvements to that in the coming year. I think it's purchase of development rights, which is what was used in the Nisqually region. So if there are areas that are extremely important to keep in agriculture, that is a tool that we should be able to use that we haven't used since the 1990s. And there's a number of other conservation tools and leveraging the partnerships that we have here in the county with our state agencies, with our local conservation groups and land trusts. Because for example, we just started pulling together a number of groups focused on habitat connectivity. And you pull a bunch of people into a room and you realize you all have access to different funds, you all have different specializations, and if you get them all in a room and you sit down with a map, you can identify where the greatest needs are and which organization around that table might be best suited to move forward in securing that additional land or securing that additional funding. But I think it really just comes down to partnerships. But if you only use a regulatory tool, then it's not gonna be nearly as powerful.
I also think, to the county manager's point, that just because the board may move forward on this item, the commitment to all of those pieces is still there. We're gonna continue to do what needs to be done, the commitment to farmland preservation. And Ashley is on point. I think that's the really important piece for the community to know, is this action doesn't stop the story. We're gonna continue to move forward with the board's direction on preservation of farmland and all those other tools. I think that's really an important piece.
Can I ask about so, we heard that 15,500 acres. That doesn't, I guess my question is, what is it? I've struggled with this, and it doesn't seem like we're all talking about the same, like, how do you gauge the significance of that, right? Like, to me, a number is irrelevant. Like, the point is some counties might not have good farmland soil. Maybe they should have 0 acres, because they're a mountain or whatever,
Kitsap does not have any agricultural zone
So
land.
to come in and tell me that, well, Thurston County, has 15,500 acres. Okay, well, I want to know a lot more than that. So like, the question is that, it seems like a better number would be the ratio of, as you say, you analyze your soils and what percentage of your prime soils are in the zoning that would be protective of those soils. It's never going to be 100%, right? Because history and things get sold and things happen. But there's probably some sweet spot where you wouldn't want 0% of your, if you've got prime farmland soils in your county, and it may be a tiny amount or it may be a huge amount, you'd want some reasonable proportion of those protected so that that activity on the best lands for it can be. So I guess my question is, am I on point in thinking of it that way? And if that's the better metric, then how does Thurston County do? And it sounded like what you said was that you think all of our best soils are within is that what you said?
I mean,
If I were to just look at the map with no zoning and I map out, where are our best soils? I don't care about the irrigating, rocky, and
Yeah.
it can only be grazed, but really good farming soils.
yep, our
What
river
percentage
bottom.
of those are in long-term?
I'm going off of memory here, but I think it's between 35 and 40% of the best of the best. So your type 1, type 2, type 3 soils.
Like the Schoenbacher Ranch out there, it's got that river bottom, which is the perfect soil. And then it's got that rocky stuff that you got,
The uplands, yeah.
wasn't properly
So
classified.
if you were starting out, is what you're saying, so if you were starting out from 0, like we were drawing Thurston County from ground 0, no limitations, and farmland was our top priority, there might be, you're saying, so 15,500 is about 40%, let's just say.
Between 35 and 40%.
So there's really 35,000 acres of the best soils, and we've got 15,500 in long-term ag. Is that?
I don't have a chart,
Yeah.
so I don't want to make a.
Yeah, okay,
make
but
an
just
erroneous
as a
statement.
way of thinking about it in ballpark, and then we could look at you might look at another county and see where they're at with that.
Yep.
That would seem more relevant to me than just throwing out a number and.
Yes, like if you look at Skagit County, where most of it is in the floodplain, they're gonna have more of those soil types than a place like Thurston, where you've got glacial till. We've got a different geologic.
But what I think you were saying is that what we do have in long-term ag is good soil. It's like we don't
Yes.
have long-term ag zoning on inappropriate soils.
Nope, if you look at a map, it's like, oh, yep, along the Chehalis River, yep, along the Nisqually, it's our bottomland.
And I think
Oh, sorry, yeah.
just to respond to you before we get to Commissioner Fournier, I think about what you're looking for as the context. And you're right, a number may not mean anything if there's no context, but if you're looking at, do you want to understand how many acres do we estimate are the best farmland? And therefore you have a larger number, and then you know that number that Ashley quoted, okay, now I have a reference to that. So as you give it some thought, if you have any more questions, just send them to Ashley.
Yeah, no, I'm just playing around with some of the ideas, and I was
Sure.
going through all the notes. Commissioner Fournier, I'll get to you in 1 second. I had and those are my big questions, really. And I have some really kind of small questions based on things we heard at public comment that I think are just minor, but I wanted to see what the board thought. But I'll go to Commissioner Fournier.
I want to, I'd like to hear, like, how do we define what success is for this program? Because I hear, like Commissioner Menz was talking about, well, 15,000 acres, 20,000 acres, 30,000 acres. If we just define success by, the number of acres preserved, I mean, is that the goal? Because when I think about farmland, I think about what it produces. And so is there like, is there like an overarching goal to this program that where we can define success as more than just preserving acres and somehow like quantifying what those acres produce as a success measure?
So to his first question, Ashley, how would we define success with this program?
So there's the success of today, and there's the success of
The overall, I would say that there are multiple ways, and as you were talking, there's one thing that I just want to clarify is using zoning, using the regulatory tool isn't necessarily preserving farmland. It means that you're not allowing as much development on it, but there's no requirement that it has to stay a farm. You're not extinguishing development rights in perpetuity. So I just want to be clear that it's just a way to, reduce the number of houses that could be built. And then in terms of, I think to your point, Commissioner Fournier, the state's been struggling with this, coming up with agricultural viability metrics, and we're actually more in the lead of trying to pencil out what those would look like, because I think you're right. I think it's a combination of land being conserved, but without that land, without supporting the productivity of that land and supporting the farmers, it's just going to lay fallow.
the success of today is satisfying the future-wise appeal. The success of the program is continuing to stay in the lead ahead of the state in defining those metrics for success.
Can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, I really appreciate your approach, and everything that's in here today, I'm really appreciative of. I just, I'd love to have more conversations about, like the holistic approach and how we measure, because success has to be measured in more than, for this, for farmland preservation, in my mind, has to be measured more than just land that's set aside as not to be houses. That land has to produce something to be actual, useful farmland that goes towards the greater good of the community.
Agreed. And Josh, to what the mission is in what we're doing here, just provide that context so it's in focus about or Ashley, the future-wise.
Josh is really good at distilling it down. We are doing this in response to a future-wise appeal, and we've been asking extensions every 3 months for the last 2 years on that appeal. So really taking action on December 17th satisfies that appeal. It allows us to invest more resources in the broader list of farmland conservation projects that we'd like to work on.
Sometimes it can be hard to remember where we started when we've gotten so far. And before Ashley came on board, we had FutureWise appealed our comprehensive plan based on whether or not we had the right soils and had done the resoil mapping. And so we brought that to the Board of County Commissioners, and you all said, the board at that time, said, please try and satisfy this appeal. And also, can you think about some big things that you can do in agriculture? And I said, yeah, you bet. As the CPED director at that time, I said, certainly, let's start a program. Let's hire a program manager. So we started this journey with a very specific mission to satisfy the FutureWise appeal, with also the board saying, let's open this box and see what's in it. And so we've done that. And so to sacrifice the initial mission while we're also still exploring the box, that for me, I think is the decision point that the board needs to consider. The work has been awesome. And without your direction, we would not have had the highlight reel that Ashley provided, and wouldn't have gotten to this point of being able to satisfy the appeal if we wouldn't have done the soils mapping discussion. So I think we're at a really great point. The board can decide what it likes, but thank you to all the hard work that's gone into this program.
Commissioner,
If we were to expand the timeline, what would happen? Like, do we have to submit something by this year?
How long has it been? 2 years? Year and a half?
I think 2.5. Well, it's actually 3 years. We got an extension to get the work group set up,
And
so.
what our legal counsel has said is FutureWise is losing patience. And we're like, well, what does that mean? And obviously, our legal counsel can't say when FutureWise is going to provide a second appeal. But like Ashley said, it's been 2.5, 3 years that they've been giving us space on this to have this conversation.
So there's a bit of a time clock on this one.
And I will say, like, in the backdrop, I mentioned we are working on the comprehensive plan update. There's a whole chapter in there that specifically focuses on natural resource lands. Agriculture is a big part of that. All of that work is still continuing.
That's right.
And it won't go away just because the appeal gets satisfied. It just means that that piece gets locked down, so then we can have broader community conversations about other land use tools. Might be in the toolbox.
Can I ask a couple of questions? So these are things that came up in the public hearing. One was about why we have warehouses as an allowed use? Is that within long-term ag?
It is only in support of an agricultural operation in an area of the farm where you do not have prime soils.
Okay, and then the second thing I wanted to ask was, a couple of people brought up Whatcom in particular, but having overlays for protection, what does that mean?
Yep, that is, we have looked into that. Until we get the long-term ag zoning locked down, it is really hard to explore sort of the accessory land use tools you would use. You gotta figure out the outfit you're gonna wear, and then the scarf or the shoes and
That I can understand.
that.
So that's something we can just talk about later.
Yep, and it is, and I am very familiar with theirs. We actually sat down with their staff and talked through how their overlay works and where we could tweak it to make it work better.
And then the last one I had was something about, and I know we talked about this, I think it was this is the minimum parcel size issue. Wasn't that part, like having 20 acres to 5 acres and all that? Wasn't that part of what we were considering and we kind of set aside? Or did we make a change there? What the minimum size should be along?
Oh, you mean block size?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that one, the block size was split in terms of the interest in changing block size from the stakeholder work group all the way through the planning commission process. There were some folks who said, just go ahead and reduce the block size. But what we heard from our code compliance section, as well as farmers when we did outreach, because we did like a whole road tour earlier on in this process, was there's still a risk of complaints from neighbors, that if you reduce the block size, you actually increase the number of complaints, noise complaints, smell, things of that nature when someone's just doing their normal farming operations. And that was sort of the genesis of why we had a block size to begin with and why other counties have them. So just sticking with the one that we have.
Still my top two questions, and it was right on. It was perfect. So I want to go back. Revenue was another big piece that came up in public comment, right? And this is an opportunity for us to go and seek out revenue from the community in order to kind of preserve this. And so this is something me and Commissioner Menser had discussed, and it was the capacity and conservation futures. And if we were to put up a measure up, right, like.
We're only using a third of our capacity.
Yeah.
That is definitely one of the options. The last slide, if we go to it, is that's exactly what's being explored with the Working Lands Conservation Strategy. So this is a story map that was created for that kickoff meeting. And that's your agriculture program manager's farm right there.
Did we send that to the board yet?
I don't think so. There's a link there if you want to get a little sneak preview.
I would encourage you to look at that link, not just for the information, but how Ashley's team has curated that information and the pictures. It's amazing. Amazing representation of our county. There's some beautiful pictures there.
Yeah, and they're all from Thurston County. It also starts telling our conservation story. I mean, the board year after year has funded all these amazing projects through Conservation Futures. Many of those have gone to support farms here in Thurston County, but we don't have a compilation of those stories, and so we're working on that right now. This is also a really good primer for what are our conservation programs. There's a broad array of them. that the county implements to support our farmers. And there are opportunities to turn dials on every single one of them to be more effective. So conservation futures, that's a big one. Of course, there's the conservation REIT 3 tax. I know Commissioner Edwards, you've brought that one up in board meetings. So there are options. There are also public-private partnership options. There are endowment. There's a whole plethora of options that are out there that we will be bringing to the board. And we're going to be bringing them to you at 3 different funding levels. So with current funding, what is this county going to be able to accomplish in terms of conservation? If you turned a dial, on conservation futures and one of these other funding sources, what would you be able to accomplish? And then sort of you went all in, this is really what Thurston County wanted to do, is conserve farmland. What would you be able to accomplish? But you need that information. You also need the information about how it would impact taxpayers. It's a broader conversation, right? So
This is a ongoing conversation, not an end to a conversation.
Nope. So I think it would be appropriate, if you're okay with it, if we come in early 2025 when we've got more information from the consultants to give a briefing on where we're at with the working lands conservation strategy.
Bye, Commissioner Edwards, back for that one.
I'm sorry.
You can give public comment.
I'll just go be a cheerleader for Ash.
Trying to recruit him onto the planning commission.
Okay,
So I think so there's the next steps on the appeal. And I think the bigger next step is having that conversation, because that's the creative, fun, how do we build coalitions of support? How do we leverage our partnerships and support our landowners and farmers?
So-
Did you see Commissioner Fournier?
oh,
He had an action up there for a second.
Commissioner,
Thumbs up.
That was a thumbs up, because I'm ready for the next exciting creative part of the conversation.
we're down to the last couple minutes. I guess the question is, you need direction from us that we're moving forward with this as part of our package, and I see a couple thumbs up here from the same commissioner. 3, I'm supportive of what we're doing. I'm more just looking toward the future and making sure I can answer constituent concerns, but I didn't hear anything that gave me concern about what we're trying to, this big important step that we're taking, the 17th. I guess I'm questioning, we have 2 minutes. We had a public hearing on the Grand Mound, and that's part of what we're going to be asked to move forward. And is there an appetite, I guess, for the board to have a discussion about what we heard, or?
Right now.
Well, not right now, but I mean, before we have to vote on the 17th.
I'd like to.
Yeah,
We
that's-
requested that.
We did?
Yeah.
Okay.
We held it, but I think the public comment that came in yesterday might shape a different direction moving forward. So there was the public hearing, and then we did a follow-up briefing.
Well, right, that wasn't even a public hearing, that was just
It was
public
just
comment.
public
just people coming out.
comment, and I want to,
So we don't have,
CPED's
let me just interject. We don't have another briefing scheduled for you all.
We requested it at the end of the public hearing. It was one of the requests to have a follow-up based on public comment.
You're right.
And we held that. So we did hold that one.
Okay.
But then public comment yesterday.
No. What she's saying, so yes, we'll come back next week to
So-
talk that through.
We have that wrapped into the agenda item. So we have options for what you will put in, what you could put in the comp plan. And our thought was to have that discussion during that period.
When is that?
Will Mosky on Tuesday?
Tuesday agenda setting. I won't be here, but Josh will be here and Andrew Bond is going to be acting in capacity. But CPED is here to support
So
the
you-
board's decision.
You want to have that conversation during agenda setting?
We could have it anytime.
Yeah, let's schedule it for a separate work session. We'll work with Amy on that, only because I want to make sure that
Sure.
it could just jam up the agenda setting.
Totally. Good point.
Yeah, I want to make sure you have enough time to talk it through.
And Ashley's gonna take next week off so she can stay and be here for Christmas so her staff can leave.
Oh.
So,
Could I request a meeting with you and any staff who can talk to me about that before we have the work session? I just have a couple questions that I don't want to tie up that work session, that I think would be more efficient if I had it answered before.
Yeah, we can schedule that.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have a thumb on the long-term ag from Commissioner Claus?
What?
Long-term ag.
So unanimous.
Unanimous on the ag piece, and we'll have a follow-up discussion on the Grand Mound, and
Yeah.
we didn't hear anything about Black Lake. I'm assuming the discussion will focus around the Wilmowski project, so.
Yeah, we'll bring that back next week. Thank you for the reminder.
Definitely, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I
Got this
confused the prior one. Thank you
Okay,
all.
so we're at the end of the agenda. Great
Good-
job,
good
Ashley.
job. Thank you. You know, I think finally we're getting, I'm hearing, I don't know, you weren't around when we had our ag representative from USDA.
Yeah.
Just, I know I'm getting old because I know him well and I can't bring your name up.
Talking about Jeff Swotek?
Yeah, Jeff, anyway.
Oh.
Yeah, I put you in that same category. He had a very good rapport with the folks in the ag activity and farm activity. I think you fit that.
Well, that is a huge compliment.
Ashley works hard at it.
Thank you all.
Okay, everybody, we're adjourned.
Okay.